Johnny Crowder, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really glad to have you here. And I was especially eager to interview you after seeing the TEDx video that you have up that talks about your journey. And it's a remarkable life journey, which at this point finds you as founder and CEO of CopeNotes, a text-based mental health program or platform that provides daily support to users in nearly 100 countries around the world. And the reason I call it remarkable is that the story of your earlier life, no one could have predicted this outcome. So please take us through the stepping stones of your journey, if you will. Start at the beginning. Where were you born, etc.
Yeah, my one of my employees says something that I think is hilarious. She says, I was born at a very young age.
Yeah.
So I will say that I was born at a very young age in Tampa, Florida. And I think you're right. Like growing up in the house that I grew up in, I didn't even have hope in helping myself form
Well,
healthier mental and emotional habits and behaviors. Like I kind of, I grew up with a bunch of different mental health diagnoses, and in an abusive environment, you have this kind of learned helplessness. Like this is the way I'll always be.
yeah. So back it up just a little bit. What can you tell us about your parents to better understand the home environment that you grew up in?
Well, both of my parents are alive, and I am working on restoring relationships with them. So I always do my very best to speak as well of them as possible. I think that um, there was a lot of pressure in the home that was exacerbated by drug and alcohol use. And I think that made it especially difficult to have conversations that are challenging. And we also saw anger being dealt with in a very specific manner that we all took on as kids. We figured, if that's how you're supposed to express yourself when you're upset, then we might as well carry out those same behaviors.
You say when we were kids, did you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have some siblings.
Yeah. And where are you in the order? In the birth
I have chronic middle child syndrome.
order? Okay.
So I'm
What
right in the
is,
middle.
yeah, what is the middle child syndrome? Is that wanting to be seen and heard?
I mean, maybe you could argue that, the only reason that I'm doing public advocacy and running a company and singing and speaking and doing all of the things that I enjoy doing, there's probably some like deep subconscious root of not feeling seen and heard and understood as a youth. I could totally see some validity in that theory.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in the narrative in your YouTube, you mentioned that there was physical abuse, sexual abuse. I know you don't want to badmouth your parents because you're trying to uh, reestablish a solid footing with them, but we can just put that out there. And you refer to emotional abuse, and I think you said you were bullied at school.
Oh yeah, it wasn't just abuse in the household. I was definitely like that classic like the bullyable kid. Like I wore glasses and I loved reading and drawing and playing guitar and writing poetry. And so I kind of was that like quintessential kid to get picked on in pretty much all the way through high school.
Wow, that's so remarkable given where you are now. And that really is hard to believe, but I believe you when you say it. Were you kind of a nerd? Is that how they saw you?
Oh, 100%. I loved science fiction. I had a really bad acne.
Oh,
I was the kid who would rather draw or paint or use pastels. I was always very artistic. I'm wearing women's jeans right now. So I always, dressed a little differently and behaved a little differently, spoke a little differently. And I think as my mental illnesses started becoming more invasive in my everyday life, like interrupting my speech and my ability to relate to people in middle and high school, I think that only just drew more attention to me
Oh,
in
yeah.
in the wrong way, not in a way that I wanted.
Yeah, right. But what I'm getting is that you were a sensitive, artistic kid who, those kinds of kids still exist. They still get bullied, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And it's like in the world of kids can be very cruel. And often, in adulthood, things can turn around. But you really had a lot of challenges even as you were moving ahead towards adulthood. You refer to eating disorders. Was that just as a child, or did you have that as you moved into adulthood as well?
No, even I mean, even now, I put a lot of effort into making sure that I'm eating enough food. Like for a long time, I struggled with anorexia and bulimia, and I was doing bodybuilding. So if it's masquerading as something really masculine, it's not as easy to identify. Like,
Yeah.
people who are cutting weight in order to meet a certain um, weight category, or people who are like, oh, I'm just, I'm not going to eat for a few days so I can get my body fat percentage down before a photo shoot or whatever. And it's these things that have been kind of normalized that I've now carried over with me, and I unintentionally. And now I put a lot of time and effort into making sure that I'm eating enough food and that I'm taking better care of my body.
Wow. And then in terms of emotional problems and various disorders, uh, you reference hallucinations at some point and suicide attempts. Do you want to expand on those at all?
Yeah, I had all sorts of different hallucinations, primarily visual and auditory. So I would hear things in people that were not there, and I would see things in people that were not there. And some of those hallucinations were very exciting and Hollywoody, like I would see a wolf in my hallway or something very dramatic. And then other hallucinations were very mundane. Like for a long time I hallucinated that I had a printer, and I actually did not. So
You did,
there's a lot of
wait,
like very very boring long standing
wait, you
hallucinations
had
that I
what? A
lived with.
print, a printer?
Yep, just
Okay,
that I had a printer.
but you didn't have a printer.
Correct.
Yeah. No.
So I think I purposely bring that up because a lot of people, when they think of schizophrenia, they have like a very dramatic image of what they think it looks
Right.
like. But my experience with schizophrenia was varied. Like some hallucinations were very dramatic and some were pretty mundane.
Around what age were you when those began?
Probably middle school was when they first started.
Uh,
High school was when I started really struggling with them. And then college is when they became debilitating.
oh, wow. And was I know for a lot of people there are tormenting voices saying that how awful you are, how worthless you are, and so on. Did you have those kinds of voices as well?
Yes, I experienced that. But at the same time, like inside of the same day, I would also experience delusions of grandeur and feeling that, I was the only person. For example, for many years, I thought that if I stepped on cracks, there were small blades in those cracks, like in the sidewalk, let's say, that would
Right.
hurt my feet. But I also thought that I was the only person in the world who could see them
Uh,
and feel them and knew that they were there. So there was this idea that I was so clued in. I knew so much more about the world than these other people. So I would sometimes feel that I was worthless and, not good enough. And other times I would feel that I had this like secret knowledge that so many other people didn't have. It
yeah.
was, it was a very confusing time for me.
Yeah. And you say you had multiple diagnoses. You were also diagnosed as bipolar, which some of what you're describing now would seem to fit, and ADHD. So you had a real mix, and you did get a variety of psychotherapies, I guess, dealing with what probably both medications and psychotherapy. So talk to us a bit about your experience with those.
Yeah, when I first actually went to see a doctor, I was not convinced that it would help me.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm too broken and I'm too uniquely broken for whatever, prepackaged therapy option you have to really help me. And I was just as skeptical of medicine. And it took me, I bounced around between a few doctors before I found one that I really trusted. And I was in treatment for months before I actually started participating. Because for the first however many months, I would sit there with a bad attitude, arms crossed, like, you can't help me. And
Uh-huh.
it took a long time for me to actually start being a willful participant and cooperating with my doctor, which is when I really started seeing some progress in treatment.
Wow, wonderful that there was that turnaround. What what do you think triggered that ability to participate when you were so skeptical and negative? What turned that
I
around?
think it was a matter of health education. Like, I was in high school at the time and I was taking psychology courses. So I chose that as my elective. And I was learning about abnormal psychology, like all of the different things I was experiencing. And there was something about being in a classroom and reading in a textbook. Like, keep in mind, when my doctors were diagnosing me, I thought they were insulting me. I'm like, bipolar? How dare you?
Yeah.
Like that, I felt so offended. But then if I'm sitting in a classroom taking a psychology course and I'm reading in a textbook describing what hallucinations are like and describing symptoms and behaviors associated with bipolar 1, it felt so much more objective.
Hmm.
And I realized, oh man, like, if therapy and medication are helping these people who have similar life experiences, then they really could help me too.
Wow. Wow. So it's interesting that seeing it out there in an objective way, that you could then admit the truth of what was going on and that it wasn't necessarily the horrible thing that that it might have been made out to be. Um, Now you're also a musician. I see an electric guitar hanging on your wall back there, and
Yeah.
and so when did you make your entry into the world of music? Because I know you've been a real heavy metal, hard banging rocker, right? And you've got tattoos on your arms, sleeves, right? So
Mhm.
talk to us about your musical career.
Yeah, when I was younger, like I said, I was definitely the more artistic type. And when
Yeah.
I would lose my temper, when I would feel sad or rejected, I would pick up a guitar or I would turn on the radio. I had a cassette player that I would listen to all the time, and then I got a CD player. So I was always turning to music for not only comfort when I listened to music, but also in creating music like a channel for self-expression, somewhere to put those feelings rather than just bury them. So I started playing guitar when I was 8 years old, and I played my first concert when I was 16. And so I'm 29, about to turn 30 now. So it's been well over a decade of performing live. And um, when I was 16 years old, when I played my first show, I was terrified. I couldn't look at the audience. I stared straight down at the stage the entire time and paced back and forth.
Yeah.
But now when I perform, I feel so alive and connected and engaged. So I didn't think I would have a music career, but I always hoped that I would. And I think probably around the end of my first year in college was when we started touring full time, and my band actually got signed and it became like my job. And we were on tour 6, 8 months a year.
Wow. So the band that you're in now, what's the name of the band?
It's called Prison.
Prison. And is that your band? Like, are you the band leader or a member, or what's your role in the band?
I am the vocalist, and I am fortunate to have the ability to write a lot of the music.
Okay.
And I write all of the lyrics, and I work a lot on the creative direction of the band, which is cool because it allows us to write music about mental health, about sobriety, about sexual consent and suicide prevention, and all of these things that are so important to me.
Oh, good. And the name of the band, Prison, does that have a particular significance to you? Psychological significance?
Oh yeah.
Seems like it might. Yeah.
Yeah, like, we spend if you think about someone in prison, they stay inside of this one little confined space, uh 8 feet by 10 feet or whatever the dimensions are. They stay in this cell for 23 hours. They're stuck in there. And then for an
Yeah.
hour, they get to go out into the yard to have rec time. They play basketball or lift weights or play cards or do something that gets them out of that confined space. And that's how we've always viewed music and performing, is like, as musicians, I know a lot of creative people can relate to this. We spend a lot of time in our heads being critical of ourselves or being frustrated or perpetuating these automatic negative thoughts, but expressing ourselves through art gives us that 1 hour reprieve, just like a prisoner has when they're engaging in rec time.
Yeah. Yeah. What about your tattoos? Give us the history of your tattoos, and I'm wondering if they uh, tell your story in some way.
I think everyone's tattoos kind of tell their story, whether they want them to or not. Can people see me right now, or they can only hear me?
You're going to be on YouTube as well as only hearing. The podcast is only hearing, but we'll also put this interview on YouTube. So feel free to show off
Yeah,
that which
I'll
can
just
be
touch on a
seen.
couple. I'll just touch on a couple. So my right arm, it would kind of be challenging to show you the whole arm, but it's all nightmares that I've had.
Ah,
And when I learned about exposure therapy, I thought, well, why don't I get the things that I'm afraid of tattooed on my arms so that I see them every day?
uh-huh.
And then over time, through exposure, I won't be quite as afraid of them. So every time I would have not just one nightmare, but I used to have recurring night terrors, and I would
Yeah,
have sleep paralysis for many years. And after I would experience the same nightmare maybe 30, 60, 180 nights in a row, I would get that tattooed on me as part of this sleeve. And then I would look at it every day.
yeah.
And over time, it really did help desensitize me to those
Oh,
images, so that when I did face them in my sleep, I thought, you don't scare me. I know you're just a dream. I see you on my arm every day, you know?
that's the most amazing story of desensitization that I've ever heard.
I don't recommend it for everybody.
Yeah,
It is definitely a very intense way to deal with sleep paralysis and night terrors, but it helped me quite a bit.
yeah, amazing. Wow. And so I'm wondering how you, uh, in your presentation on YouTube, you say that it wasn't a dramatic turnaround, but rather took time and a lot of different specific steps. And so because now I'm struck by, you can talk about neuroscience, you can talk about different approaches to psychotherapy and all. How did you acquire this? Maybe take us through some of those steps.
How did I acquire?
All this knowledge of
Oh,
not only about yourself, but about neuroscience and psychotherapy
yeah.
approaches and so on.
Yeah. So in high school, I started taking college level psychology courses. And then when I went to college, I actually pursued a degree in psychology, and I had a focus on abnormal psychology and neuroscience. And I was extremely fascinated by it because I had a personal stake in it, right? Like,
Sure.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to go to school to learn about statistics. No, I want to go to school to learn about what the heck is happening inside of my brain.
Yeah.
And then after school, I started working in peer support and public advocacy, serving on nonprofit boards, and I got really involved in volunteer work in the mental health space. I was in treatment, of course, through all of this. And even now, I'm still in therapy.
Okay.
So my whole, the last 15 years of my life basically have been dedicated to gaining a better understanding of the brain. Like literally earlier this morning, I was doing dishes and listening to a TED talk about how the brain rationalizes failure. Like every day I'm reading and listening to lectures and learning, and I'm fortunate that it's part of my job, part of
Yeah.
running a mental health resource, but even if it wasn't, I would still be learning those things because it's so important to me.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that interests me too around that is having seen your TED presentation. Um, it's so polished. I mean, how did you learn to be such a good speaker?
Honestly, it's funny, if you knew me when I was younger, I actually had a fair amount of difficulty speaking and forming coherent sentences. I know that not everybody who lives with schizophrenia faces that. Not everybody who lives with OCD faces that, but my diagnoses were particularly disruptive when it came to verbal speech, which is why I preferred to write. um and something that really helped me, aside from, like, of course, including therapy and medication, was also I took improv classes
Okay.
and like improv comedy, and it kind of forced me to try to speak
Yeah.
through some of these challenges that I had. And that, plus performing in a band and being a vocalist, I just had reps. Like every single night I was either on a stage speaking, I was on a stage performing vocals, or I was on a stage performing comedy. And not only that, but I also did peer support and was teaching comedy, so I kind of like forced myself to get better at interpersonal communication.
Yeah. Well,
It's
I've
been
watched
very
I've
gradual.
watched a lot of TED presentations, and I'm always really impressed by how polished they are. And and yours is right up there with the best of them. Uh,
I really appreciate that. It takes
yeah.
an incredible amount of work.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. Um, and what a great role model you are for other people who are out there suffering, and an example of, hey, you can get through this, and also your willingness to talk about it, and your willingness to keep working on your growth, keep working on your intellectual understanding. All of that is so impressive. Now I have to ask you, how did you learn to run a business? Because you're running a business.
Yeah, that someone asked me in an interview recently, like a couple months ago, they were like, "What's the hardest thing you've ever done?" They're asking, like, you've gone to trauma therapy for abuse, and you've like stayed sober and weaned off medication. Like, what's been the hardest part? And I was like, honestly, the hardest part is running a business. It's so hard. Like a lot of it actually was, so my background is not business, if you can't tell. Like, it's psychology. I
Right.
didn't go to school for business. I don't, that's not my background. So I have Googled so many things. I have searched on YouTube for tutorials. I've asked um random people that I just reached out to people who seem like they're doing a good job with things and asked them. It's the same style. It's the same approach that I've taken towards learning about my mental and emotional health. I've applied towards learning how to run a business. Like, I'm always listening to lectures and reading books and asking people for their input. It's like a crowdsourced company, because I must have asked 5,000 people for their input before I actually did anything.
Wow. Yeah, because so much of what's on YouTube these days seems to be how money making. Those
Mm.
podcasts seem to do very well, and they're out there in such abundance. So, so you've really milked that as a source, which I
You
have to
have
say,
to, like,
yeah,
if you don't have a big pile of money sitting around waiting for you to dig into it to hire a bunch of people to start your business,
yeah,
then you need to get really scrappy with free resources. So
yeah,
that's what I was doing. I live in Tampa Bay, Florida, and I was Googling Tampa Bay, Florida small business resources free. And then I called up all these places and submitted applications for free support. And then I would meet with every small business consultant that was like state sponsored or county sponsored, where the entrepreneur doesn't have to pay to use the services. And I tried to use every free resource I could find.
yeah. So now you've got this business, and you've got a website, and your website looks fully professional and so on. So I have the impression maybe that it's grown to the place where you're starting to be able to hire people.
Yeah. So, and thank you for the kind words on the website. Believe it or not, I built the website. And that's not my background either. So
Yeah,
that's another
right.
thing I YouTubed and Googled.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, we hired our first employee in 2019, I want to say. And we've been able to make some more hires since then. We're still hiring more people right now. So it's been it feels very slow and gradual, but if you zoom out, I think we're much further at the 4-year mark than any of us anticipated we would be.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, in terms of the personal growth, I have the impression that you're married. Is that right? And maybe
I
have,
am not.
oh, you're not
No,
married. Okay.
no. I've been single for a long time, and I actually was just in my first relationship post trauma therapy just recently, like late last year, early this year. So that was like a big victory to be
Yeah.
able to date again after going through that.
Yeah. Good. Good. Okay. So now we come to this wonderful development of your business, which I love the story that you tell that, you know, initially you would try putting up post-it notes for yourself, inspirational post-it notes. Tell us about that and what your insight from that experience was.
Yeah, so I was learning about the subconscious mind and how things make an imprint on it, even if we're not consciously choosing for that thing to make an imprint on it. Kind of like, put good in, get good out, right? Like if you're reading things that are healthy, then that should make an impact on the way you think over time. So I was like, okay, why don't I actually made sticky notes of, it's hard for me to like the cheesy, like platitudes, like, oh, just shrug it off or
Uh-huh.
something. I'm like, no, I need something like a little more tangible. So I made these sticky notes that um, helped me challenge negative thoughts that I would have regularly. And I would stick them all around my house. And the goal was to surround myself with the type of content that would influence the way I thought.
Sure.
But
Sure.
the challenge I was running into was, after a couple of days of those sticky notes being there, my brain would just completely tune them out and they like blended in.
Yeah, habituation. You talk about that,
Mm-hmm.
and I totally understand that as somebody who's put up my own sticky notes over the years.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm, things like that, to make myself try to be more expressive. So you discovered habituation for yourself, and that it was after a bit this really wasn't working for you. So tell us about the next step that you went to.
Yeah. I was trying to surprise myself, which is, it's hard to tickle yourself.
It's
It's hard
hard
to
to surprise.
surprise yourself.
Yeah, right.
So I was originally setting alarms on my phone with different messages on them, but then
Okay,
I knew that the alarms were coming because I set them. So
right.
even if I tried to make them random times, my brain would still be like, "Oh yeah, don't forget you have that alarm coming up." So um I wanted to figure out how I could surprise or whether or not surprising somebody would actually make a difference. So I wrote out some messages and texted them to friends unsolicited. They didn't know I was going to
Oh,
do
they
it or
didn't
what it
know
was
they were going
about.
to
I
get
just
these
started
texts from you, right?
yeah, I just started sending people text messages that I thought would help them. And the responses were, I still have screenshots. Actually, I should publish these one day. I
Yeah,
have the screenshots of people saying, what, how did you know I needed to hear that? Like that helps so much, or that's making such a big impact on me. And I was blown away because it was kind of a test, right? I'm like,
yeah,
well, we'll just send some texts and see how it works. And almost everybody I texted was like, wow, I needed to hear that so badly.
yeah. And the interesting thing is, you did not tailor the messages for their problems, but somehow,
No.
somehow their brain incorporated the message in terms of their own particular life issues, so that it seemed like, whoa, this is the universe speaking to me.
Yeah, I think that's a big misconception in the mental health world is that like we need to hyper tailor everything to exactly what somebody is going through. And it's like, I mean, I think about it like water. Like when you drink water, the water goes into your body and does what it's supposed to do for your body. It doesn't stop at your mouth and go, well, wait a second. What is this person's vitamin balance for the day? And well, hold on, how old is this person and what? No, everybody drinks water, and water does what it's supposed to do in your body. And I am a firm believer that while you can hyper customize every little detail of everything that helps you, it is not necessary for you to actually experience positive results from using a resource. Books don't tailor themselves to you. Songs don't tailor themselves to you. Your toothbrush does not tailor itself to you. And these things help us tremendously every day.
Well put. Well put. Well, tell us more about your business, and tell us about CopeNotes, which is the business that you're running, and feel free to make a pitch here for it to get other people interested in subscribing.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with CopeNotes, and I'll try to make this short and interesting because I don't want people to be listening to a podcast and then go, oh, great, a commercial. No, what we do at CopeNotes is we send randomly timed text messages that contain psychology facts or journaling prompts or exercises, all sorts of different content. And those messages are written by peers with lived experience. So just regular old people like you and me. And they are designed to interrupt negative thought patterns and provide catalysts for positive thought so that over time, your brain learns to think in healthier patterns. And this is for people with or without a mental health diagnosis. And it's also for not only individuals, but also you can give a subscription to a friend or family member. We have family subscriptions, and we also serve really large groups like school districts and businesses and governments, insurance companies, and so on.
That's wow, the growth into those areas in such a short period of time. So you offer a 7-day free trial. So I signed up for the 7-day free trial.
Oh,
and,
cool.
And yeah, and I got some of those messages, but I'm wondering, you found that in your own experience, one message a day wasn't going to do it for you. You really needed to be kind of bombarded with these things. And what if I want to be bombarded? What if I want to get a whole lot of those messages? How does that happen?
So interestingly, quantity does not actually make a huge positive impact. So think about it this way. If we're texting you more than, let's say, twice a day, your brain expects these text messages to be coming, and then you habituate that content.
Okay.
You get so used to the text messages coming in that they're not novel anymore and they don't serve as interruptions. But if we text you less than once per day, we're not enforcing the consistency necessary to form new neural pathways. So the sweet spot isn't a lot and it's not a little. It's 1 or 2 messages per day that we found to be the most effective.
Now, when you talk about the sweet spot and what you found to be effective, do you have any formal research going on presently, or do you see that in the future of the company?
Yeah, we've done 2 research studies with the University of South Florida, one of which already published and the other will publish here in a couple months. Very exciting. We've been working on these studies for literally years, and we continue to do research. It's so important to us that we get this right. Like every single day we make changes to our product and our services based on the feedback from not only individual users, but also clinicians and mental health professionals. Like every day, CopeNotes is better than the day before because of that feedback, and we're always seeking it.
So you have mental health professionals who are subscribers and who are in your feedback loop?
Well, we actually have a clinical oversight panel.
Okay.
So these are mental health professionals who review, edit, and approve all of the content. So before any message is sent to you, it's reviewed by a panel of clinicians, and we regularly consult them with like high-level strategy questions as well.
Wow. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation for me, and I'm sure for my viewers and listeners. And is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to say?
Just that, if there are people listening right now who think, "Oh, I don't need a mental health resource," or "That's not interesting to me," or "I don't live with a diagnosis," or whatever, I want to encourage you to give it a spin anyway. Like you said, and I always forget to mention this, there is a free trial on our website. You have literally nothing to lose. All you do is type in your phone number and press enter. That's it. Like, we don't collect your name, we don't collect your address, you don't put your credit card information in. Like, just type in your phone number, press, I think the button says text me. So just press text me. We'll text
Yeah.
you once a day for a week. If you don't like it, at least you learned about a new resource. And at least you allowed us to make that tiny subconscious imprint on your brain for 1 week. Because whether or not you're conscious of it or not, that is making a difference long term. And please, if nothing else, if you never give us a dime, if you never recommend us to anybody, at least allow us to make that impact on your brain for 1 week.
Hey, that's a great offer. I have to ask you, is Johnny Crowder your actual name, or is that your stage name?
No, that is my real name.
It's a great
I
rock and
wondered,
roll name.
I appreciate that. That's cool. When I grew up, I actually had a pizza delivered to the Chowder household, and a lot of people have called me Johnny Chowder before. So to hear someone say, "No, Crowder is a good name," I'm like, "Yeah, take that, pizza guy."
Yeah, yeah, it's a great name. Well, Johnny Crowder, I really want to thank you, and you can consider me one of your crowd.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for doing the trial too. Like, because it's anonymous, I never know who's using it. So it's
Yeah.
really cool to hear that you gave it a spin.
Okay. Well, thanks for being my guest today on Shrink Rap Radio.